Welcome to Preparing for the SAT Evidence-Based Reading and Writing section. Today we are going to be revisiting inference questions with a specific focus on analogical reasoning questions. So let's get started. As we discussed in Module 3, making inferences on the SAT is important in order for us to not only just understand the explicit details in the passage, but to understand the deeper ideas presented in the passage. So many questions on the SAT will test your ability to figure out what a selection suggests or implies. These implicit meaning questions will require you to draw reasonable inferences from the text. You will also encounter questions that require you to identify the textual evidence that best supports the inferences you've drawn. So as you're reading a passage, you'll want to ask yourself, what reasonable conclusions can I draw from this information? Think about what the passage states and also what you know to be true based upon prior knowledge. Questions that test your ability to make inferences on the SAT include: the passage implies that, which of the following does the author suggest in line X? It can most reasonably be inferred in passage 2 that blank. So notice that for these questions, you really have to not only understand the main idea of the passage, but you have to make a reasonable, educated guess as to the answer and back that up with textual evidence. So when we are using analogical reasoning, we are thinking about what was stated in the passage, and then we are drawing an inference and making connections to what we think the author might agree with. So the SAT will test your ability to use analogical reasoning. Analogical reasoning takes an idea or situation and applies it to a new situation. An analogical reasoning question might test your ability to determine the similarities and differences between two things, or it might test you on whether you can correctly apply information from a selection to a totally new scenario or situation. So questions about analogical reasoning may look like this. Based upon the passage, which of the following statements is the author most likely to agree with or disagree with? And then number 2, which of the following is most like blank, or is most similar or most analogous to? And so we'll need to be thinking about, again, what did we just read and what would this author agree or disagree with? As we read this passage, we're going to pay close attention to the text's main ideas. Figuring out the most important ideas can help us answer questions in which we must apply an idea to a new scenario. We're going to underline main ideas, write summaries in the margin. These notes will make it easy to find important information quickly when you're answering an analogical reasoning question. Questions we should ask ourselves are: what situations are similar to the one in the passage? How would this author feel about a different situation? So the following passage is from George Washington's Farewell Address, 1796. Notice how main ideas are underlined, and a summary is we're going to include the summary in the margins. The first thing I already notice here is that we can draw, we have a lot of context in this intro text. In that context, this is a farewell address. And so George Washington, who is our speaker, is giving a speech. And so if he's giving a speech, he clearly has a motive or a reason for giving that speech. So we're going to be wanting to think about what is that purpose for giving the speech in the first place as we read. The unity of government, which constitutes you one people, is also now dear to you. And so we also notice that the topic of this passage so far is unity of government. And we can tell that the author, George Washington, or the speaker, feels very fondly about unity of government because he says that it's dear to you. And so he's pushing for more unified government. It is justly so, for it is a main pillar in the edifice of your real independence, the support of your tranquility at home, your peace abroad. And here are some details where he is supporting this idea of this is what a unified government allows you to experience. Of your safety, of your prosperity, of that very liberty which you so highly prize. But as it is easy to foresee that from different causes and from different quarters, much pains will be taken, many artifices employed to weaken in your minds the conviction of this truth. And so here we notice he's shifting with this but it is easy to foresee that from different causes, from different quarters, much pains will be taken, many artifices employed to weaken your minds to this truth. So people will try to convince you otherwise. As this is the point in your political fortress against which the batteries of internal and external enemies will be most constantly and actively directed. It is of infinite moment that you should properly estimate the immense value of your national union to your collective and individual happiness. And so here, yes, people will try to convince you otherwise, but you must remember how your individual happiness is reliant on this national union. That you should cherish a cordial, habitual, and immovable attachment to it, accustoming yourself to think and speak of it as of the palladium of your political safety and prosperity, watching for its preservation with jealous anxiety, discounting whatever may suggest even a suspicion that it can in any event be abandoned, and indignantly frowning upon the first dawning of every attempt to alienate any portion of your country from the rest, or to enfeeble the sacred ties which now link together the various parts. And so overall, Washington is stressing the importance of unity. And we can see that from the beginning where he talks about the unity of government is dear to us, but people will try to convince us otherwise. Here's what you must remember. And so let's go ahead and capture Washington stresses in this speech the importance of unity. He warns against the division Okay, so he's warning against unity. Against division, threatening to tear apart the country. Okay, so now that we have his overall main idea in this passage, let's take a look at some of the questions that we might encounter on the SAT, specifically questions that relate to analogical reasoning. And remember, in analogical reasoning, the root of analogical is analogy, and so when we have an analogy, we're comparing two things that are similar. So we want to set up the same kind of pattern or the same relationship. So based upon this passage, of which of the following situations would Washington most likely disapprove? Let's go ahead and underline disapprove. So based off this passage, we know that he approves specifically of unified government and more kind of like collaborative behavior, but he's warning against the division in the country. So that he probably disapproves of something that would divide us. So let's take a look at the answer choices. Option A group of northern states that enter in an agreement to trade exclusively with each other. And the word exclusively stands out to me because if we are being exclusive, it means we're leaving out other states, we're leaving out other people. And as we know, Washington definitely kind of focuses on unity in this passage and the importance of a unifying government. And so he probably would not agree with this. He would disapprove of it. So this could be the answer, but we want to look at our other options. Also, just notice that this line right here in the passage, the last line that we have underlined, indignantly frowning upon the first dawning of every attempt to alienate any portion of our country from the rest. Washington frowns upon this idea that we would exclude a portion of our country from the rest, and definitely A gets at that exclusion. So again, this is something he would disapprove of. Let's look at B, a strong central government that gives few rights to the states. Actually, Washington was pretty on board with a strong central government that is unified. He would most likely disapprove if we had more rights to the states and the states were able to alienate one another and go against each other. So he's not going to necessarily disapprove of this. And then C, entering into a national treaty with the government of other neighboring nations. National treaty here is kind of like oh, we're in talks and we're making these decisions together, and it kind of gets back at that unity piece. So I definitely think he's going to agree with this, so I don't think this can be the answer. So A is our very best answer. I want to point us over here to this quick tip. Many analogical reasoning questions require you to understand the writer's point of view and then infer how the writer would apply her point of view in a different situation. And so that's what we did here. We took a look at this excerpt of George Washington's speech. We identified the topic, we identified his point of view on the topic, and then we used what we already knew to make an inference and draw a connection between what George Washington believed and what he would approve or disapprove of. And so as you tackle these next independent practices, be thinking about, number one, what is the passage about? What is the topic or main idea? How does the author view that topic? And then that once you have that down, that point of view of the author, you'll be able to eliminate incorrect answer choices on those multiple choice questions.